The Delivery by the Prowler. My name is Julie, and the story I'm about to tell you was probably the worst night of my life. It was a Wednesday. It was 5 o'clock when I walked through my front door after completing a long, hard day at work. I collapsed on the couch. I was just so tired. I laid there for a few minutes, almost falling asleep, but willed myself to get up. I had to get out of these work clothes I've been in all damn day. I jumped in the shower. My boyfriend would be home soon, and he would expect dinner waiting. But I was too damn tired to cook, so I got on Grubhub and ordered some food. It said it would take an hour, so I turned on the TV and waited. About 20 minutes after I ordered the food, I got a call from my boyfriend telling me he had to work late tonight, and he wouldn't be home until near midnight. I was disappointed, and after a short argument, I just hung up. I wasn't in the mood to fight. 10 minutes later, I got a notification from Grubhub saying Todd would be delivering my food in 20 minutes. Old Todd looked like a regular dude. Nothing to be worried about, I thought. It didn't really matter, though, because I told him just to leave the food at the front door. Right on the dot, 20 minutes later, Todd was knocking on my door with the food. I stood and waited for a minute to make sure he left. But right when I reached for the door handle, it startled me for a second. I snapped to and shouted through the door, "Just leave it there, please." I waited another minute, but again he knocked. This has happened before. Multiple times when I've asked them to just leave the food by the door, I've still had to open it to confirm I've received my food. Frustrated at this point, I opened the door. But when I looked at his face, I realized it wasn't Todd. It wasn't the face I saw on my phone. Now, I wasn't too concerned because that's happened before, an order being transferred to another driver. I looked down at my phone, though, and it still said Todd delivered my food. I got a little scared at this point. I looked back up, and he was just staring at me, with his big, sinister-looking grin plastered across his greasy face. Before I could utter a word, he said,
"Hello, darling. Here's your food. Smells delicious, doesn't it? This seems like an awful lot of food for just you, sweetie. How about you invite me in, and we could have dinner for two?"
No. My boyfriend is inside. This is for both of us," I replied hesitantly.
No, no, no. Now don't lie, darling. There's no other car in the driveway, and I don't see anybody back there.
I said, "Listen, he's in the bathroom. He'll be out any second now." I glanced down at his name badge to see what to call him, but to my horror, the name badge said Todd, and it had blood smudged across the lettering. I screamed, "Get out of here!" and slammed the door shut. I yelled through the door I was calling the police, so he better be leaving. I stared at him through the peephole. All he did was stand there and laugh. But after a minute, he turned toward his car and walked away. I backed away from the door into the living room, thinking my threat of calling the police had worked. I sighed a breath of relief. I sat the food on the table, but I noticed a red liquid seeping from one of the containers through the bag. I opened the bag, then opened the container on top. I couldn't believe my eyes. Before me sat a severed hand, pieces of flesh, and 2 eyeballs nestled on top of the food. I screamed out in terror. Just then, a loud banging came from the sliding glass door in the kitchen.
Let me in, darling. I hope you don't mind. There was just so much food, I decided to invite Todd to join us for dinner.
I called the cops right away and told them what was happening. I screamed that I was on the phone with the police and they were on their way, so he better leave. The operator told me to stay on the line and an officer would be there shortly, which they were. I opened the door and told the officer that he was in my backyard. But after a few minutes, the officer came back and said no one was there, just bloody handprints on the sliding glass door. His car was still parked in front of my house. The officers checked the car, and they found blood all throughout the front seat, the steering wheel, and the passenger seat. They then checked the trunk and found Todd's body. The police later found out poor Todd was abducted and killed sometime between his last delivery and mine. You would think it ended there, but the creep was never caught. That's the most terrifying part. He knows my name. He knows where I live. And I've been receiving strange calls lately. A man breathing heavily, then giggling sinisterly can be heard. I scream, "Who is it?" But they never answer. It happens day and night. I'm losing my mind. I know it's him. He's out there. And I'm afraid it's just a matter of time. Children of the Night by the Prowler. When the autumn moon is high, and the air is crisp, and the breeze that stirs up across the darkened sky chills the very blood that courses throughout my being, is the time I hear it calling me. It transforms my senses, my thoughts and actions. I am completely consumed by its call. Its temptation takes a locking hold of my body and completely takes control. I am no longer myself, for I am a slave to its demands. I fall to my knees as it rages through my body, staring up at the full autumn moon. Pain courses through each vein like unimaginable torture. My muscles contract and widen. I can feel my skin rip apart as the light from the moon pierces the pupils of my eyes, turning my irises from a light hazel to a darkened red. My body begins to violently contort as my muscles and bones elongate and become larger and wider. I moan out, "Why, God?" as I agonize in pain from the violent change overtaking my body, and as I feel my skin being replaced with coarse patches of fur, I hear others like me calling out. Their howls sharply cutting through the hollow winds that move through the deadened branches of the trees. I slowly become entranced in the high-pitched, melancholic tones echoing through the midnight ether, when suddenly I notice I'm without a voice. My transformation is complete. I sound like the others, the children of the night. What sweet music we make. Evil has a voice. Written by the Prowler. The darkest of nights, accompanied by the most tormented of dreams. What evil lurks through the inner walls of my mind's eye? I beg for whatever mercy is out there from the light of the warmest blessings, for I hear the screams that move through the ominous wind. Methodically, like a predator stalks its prey, it moves towards my tired person that seeks shelter from the evils that lurk for me in the night. Are they the moans from tortured spirits trying to pass along their pain from the burning catacombs of hell? If that be the case, then away from me, I say, for I have my own pains to endure. I haven't the time, reasons, or the fortitude to grapple with the plights of the damned. I now hear the whispers of the cursed. Sonnets of the dead, being regaled to me by Lucifer's poet himself. The turning of each page from his dreadful manifesto, echoing into the haunted night. Evil has a voice. I have learned this from this never-ending night. But can one ignore its message? Can one be tempted by its forbidden promises, yet walk past them with a stoic silence and find the safety of the light? Can I? Do I have the strength?
Nex adu immortalis, libri spondeo nex, adve hoc vot animadvertor, operor non timeo, zalus est proculmamus.
Caputo Effect, author unknown. If you stare into a mirror in a dimly lit room long enough, you'll start to hallucinate. It's called the Caputo Effect, named after Gregory Caputo, who discovered the bizarre illusion. Your face warps, turns into something else. For some, it's the face of a loved one. Others, it turns into a strange mashup of man and animal. Think what a pig would look like if it was bred with a man. It can even appear to be melting away, as if the skin were made of wax. While all this is interesting, they forget to talk about what happens if you stare for even longer, going past the initial visions. If you were to continue, if you've got the gall, you will begin to notice a small figure behind you, just out of the corner of your eye. It looks like a child, only completely blacked out, featureless. Sometimes people see tufts of hair sticking out on either side of its head, black as coal and stiff like wood. They resemble horns, or so they say. Continue past that, and you may notice a hitching breath, like an asthmatic gasping their last breath. You can even hear the low hiss of an oxygen tank. If you haven't chickened out by now, you may feel a breath upon your neck, or a tiny hand pressed upon your back. And beyond that, no one knows. Or if they do, they haven't lived to talk about it. Though no one can stop you from trying it yourself, it is strongly discouraged, and only the consenting party can be held responsible. Strange sound, unknown author. So I'm browsing Reddit at 1 a.m. because I can't sleep. It's dark and quiet, and I'm all bundled up against the cold. Outside, a foot of snow absorbs the usual nighttime sounds from the woods behind my house. Suddenly, I hear what sounds like faint music, as if someone left a radio on in the tool shed. I strain to hear it, but the sound is gone. Okay, I think. Just my mind playing tricks. Back to Reddit. I hear it again. This time it sounds like the same part of a song, played over and over, like it's being looped. I get up with my heart in my throat and walk to the upstairs landing. Nothing. I stand still, barely breathing, but the sound is gone. Okay, what the F? I go back to bed. Nothing for about 5 minutes, but then it's back. The sound is becoming familiar now. Not like I can recognize the tune, but like I can hear nuances, different sounds within the loop that weren't apparent at first. Now I'm really creeped out because it's starting to sound less like music and more like one of those rusty metal playground seesaws moving in the wind. The squeaky sway, giving it the rhythmic sound I mistook for music. Only there's no wind and no playground near my place, and the nearest neighbor is more than a mile away. I'm up again, and this time I can still hear it on the landing, and it's making me crazy because it's not louder or softer, but the same volume even though I've moved to a different part of the house. Like it's effing following me. There's something new to it now, like a high-pitched shriek right at the beginning, still barely audible like the rest of it. But it's like the sound is evolving, changing just enough each time I hear it to keep me interested and attentive. It's gone again, almost like it knew I was talking about it. Well, now I'm determined to figure it out, because it's going to drive me crazy if I don't. I'm sitting in my dark living room, doing that stupid thing where I keep the lights off because I think I can hear better in the dark. I'm wearing my down jacket, gloves, knit cap, and boots. I've got a flashlight in my pocket, and I'm just waiting for the sound to start up again. And I don't care how cold it is outside. When I hear it, I'm going to... There it is. Be right back. The Man in the Van by the Prowler. This happened about 27 years ago when I worked at a Pizza Hut. I worked at the store, not a driver. I was a server to people who ate at the restaurant. The salad bar we had at the restaurant at the time was big. It was new, and we had a lot of people come into the restaurant just for that. The day had been long and hard, a lot of people in the restaurant the entire day, mostly rude customers the whole day, so I was done at this point, ready to clock out and go home. There was just me and a couple of my coworkers left, just in case we got a straggler come in before we closed. The countdown began when it hit 30 minutes left. I began to clean all the tables. My coworkers began cleaning the back of the restaurant. But about 5 minutes later, I heard a loud rattling pull into the parking lot, then a loud bang when the van stopped in the parking space in front of the door to the restaurant. I looked out into the parking lot through the door and saw an old rusted van, steam rising from it in the cool, crisp night air. It reminded me of the van in Jeepers Creepers. I stood there what seemed like 5 minutes before the van door finally swung open. Out walked a huge hulking man in a long, dirty, stained light brown coat. When he walked in the restaurant, I got a better look at him. He had long, dirty, stringy hair, stains all over his body that looked like dried blood, and a smell emanating from him that smelled like death and shit dripping out of a rotting carcass. I said, "Good evening," and pointed him towards the first stall. He grunted and sat down. I put my rag and bottle of cleaner down on the front counter and went back and took his order. As I approached, his trench coat looked lumpy. I thought it was strange, but I was so out of it at this point, I didn't give two shits. I asked him what he would like, and he ordered a large cheese pan pizza and the salad bar. He then said, which I thought was strange, that he wanted no toppings because he brought his own. Like I said, I thought it was strange. What the hell does that even mean? I thought. But it was close at this point to closing. I didn't want to argue with him. He was creepy acting already. So I said, "That'll be fine, sir. I'll go put your order in, and it will be out shortly." I went back into the kitchen and told my two co-workers about the man and how strange he seemed. We could see him from the back. We watched as he began talking to himself and rocking back and forth in his seat. He then stood up and walked over to the salad bar, talking to himself the entire time, giggling and laughing. It was very creepy and eerie. We were very uncomfortable watching this play out, and I was dreading having to bring out the pizza. When he sat down, we noticed he reached down in his coat and brought out a bag and started putting red pieces from inside the bag into his salad. My coworker handed me the pizza and I brought it out. I was trembling a little. I did not want to get close to this man again. I got to the table and handed him the pizza. When I put it down in front of him, he looked up at me quick, with a wide, creepy grin on his face, and said,
"See, I told you. I brought my own toppings."
I looked down in horror. Those red pieces he was pulling out were chunks of human flesh, even tattoos on some of the pieces. I screamed. He reached out and tried to grab me, still laughing, but I pulled away, turned and ran to the back. I told my coworkers. We ran to the manager's office and locked the door and called the police. When the police arrived, shockingly, he was still sitting there, eating his fleshy meal. When the police searched his van, they found the bodies of 3 decomposed, cut-up women and 2 men. They said it looked like he had been eating on them for days. I didn't work at that Pizza Hut too much longer after that. I'm just thankful I was able to make it out of that situation alive, because it could have ended much, much worse. Cursed Remains by the Prowler. I stare at the heart of the candle-lit flame, surrounded by darkness in the seclusion of my study. The echoes from the voices that are being carried through the wind-swept halls of this ancient manor are speaking to me. In an ominous tone, they communicate their aspirations of woe and torment that wither my mind and plague my soul. This once lively home that was filled with warmth and laughter has become a retreat of sadness and pain with the passing of its more innocent residents. I have become the last branch on my once strong-rooted familial tree that has now blackened from whatever curse that had caused it to rot. One by one, I have lost my loved ones, my beautiful wife, my lovely children, the futures of this family taken away by the evil that lurks this manor's halls. I think I could take solace in my seclusion if the voices I heard were that of my loved ones, but sadly, I know it not to be. These malevolent voices, instead, torment my every thought and action. What do they want from me? Why do they continue to let me live? I've accepted my stewardship of maintaining my ancestral home, aging as it does, for I know I shall never leave, never be with my family once again, for I know I am cursed. The Haunted Mansion, written by the Duchess of Darkness. In the bewitching hour of violet hue, the moonlight casts its eerie view. Through the darkness, a haunting tale of a place where ghosts prevail. The old mansion, grand and tall, a haunted house, it's said by all, with creaking doors and broken glass. It's a place where nightmares amass. The moon hovers low in the sky, as if to watch as spirits fly. Through the halls they wander and moan. In this house they have found their home. The walls colored with faded paint, a reminder of the past, so faint. But within lies a sinister air, a feeling of utter despair. The Gothic architecture, so impressive, but in its shadows, darkness is aggressive. Whispers echo in every room, ghosts speaking of impending doom. The moonlight dances on the floor as the haunted house's tales implore of lovers lost and tragic ends, of secrets buried, never to amend. The violet sky now turns to black as the moon bids its final act. But in this gloomy, haunted sight, the darkness never bids good night. For in this house, where spirits roam, the moonlight guides them back to home. And so the darkness is not the enemy. In this mansion, they find serenity. Underneath the dark purple sky, written by the Duchess of Darkness. In the somber night's embrace, underneath the dark purple sky, we dance in the moonlight's grace, lost in each other's eyes. Our desires fuel the flames as we move in a haunted waltz. Our love, a forbidden game in this world of menacing faults. The moon, our only witness, as we surrender to our passion. Lost in the dimness, we dismiss all the rules of society's infraction. Our embrace, a blend of light and dark, as we clutch our inner demons. Beneath the moon's bewitching arc, we succumb to our desires' reasons. In this mysterious world, we find solace in each other's dark embrace. Our love, a beautiful menace, in the moonlight's alluring face. We are two souls bound by fate in this misty purple night. Our love, a forbidden state to a world of endless delight. So let us dance in the moonlight and embrace our sinister desires. For in this dark and violet night, our love burns like eternal fires. A couple of hours ago, I heard somebody talking outside my house. I ended up recording the scariest experience of my life. Author unknown. This was at about 1:10 a.m. I was about to fall asleep when I started hearing a voice outside my house. This isn't too unusual in itself, but after a minute or two, I began to hear guttural sounds that bordered on straight-up demonic, coming from the front of the house. I got out of bed and looked through the window to see a guy a few houses up the street, talking or arguing or something with himself, but in a voice that sounded like he was in desperate need of an exorcism.
Nex adu immortalis. Libri spondeo nex. Adve hoc mort animadvertor. Operor non timeo. Salus est proculmanos.
Before reaching the window, I had grabbed my phone and started recording him. I knew exactly how this shit would sound without some proof, so I covered my ass. As I was recording this guy, I was watching his progress down the street, through the opening between two curtains. Since I had all the lights off in my room, I didn't think I was visible at all. As he walked under a streetlight, I was able to make out some details about his appearance. He was an older man with longish hair, carrying what appeared to be a plastic grocery bag full of something. He was slowly making his way down the street, walking on the side opposite my house. I think he spent some time arguing with my neighbor's dogs, as they were all flipping out. He continued growling at himself until he was directly across the street from my window. That's when he stopped walking, became completely silent, then growled, almost in a sing-song way.
Are you looking at me?
I froze. He turned and stared right at me. I started breathing heavily, hoping he had said something else, praying that he wasn't actually looking at me. He then resumed his demonic gurgling growls and started walking right towards my window. At this point, I backed the fuck away from the window and ran to the living room where we keep a pistol in the cabinet. After retrieving the weapon, I ran to wake up my dad. It didn't take more than about 20 seconds from the time I left the window, but when I returned, he was nowhere to be seen. My dad didn't take me seriously, so he went back to bed, despite my pleas for him to stay awake with me. I'm terrified. I haven't seen the guy since I left the window several hours ago, but I have heard him. Once, barely audible, about an hour ago. I don't know what he said, or if he even said anything, but I know it was him. The sun's coming up pretty soon, so I'm feeling a lot better now than I was when I posted this. I'm going to try to get a few hours of sleep before my class at 11. The Cold Case of Martha. Author unknown. I've been wanting to tell this story for a while, but I never got the nerve to until now. Growing up, I had a childhood friend named Brian. Changed it for the sake of this post. Brian and I grew really close because we were as he described, misfits. We never fit in with any of the other groups of people, and because of that, we had a great understanding of each other. During my freshman year of high school, I had history class with Brian. We had a project on creating our family tree. We each had to make our own, and Brian invited me over to his house to work on the project. Brian invited me to his house so I could help him on the design element. Brian was never really a good designer or an arts and crafts kind of guy. I would always help him design and put together his projects. One time, he was creating an animal cell for biology. He molded the different structures in the cell with clay and put it on a styrofoam ball. Everything fell apart, and from that point on, he asked me to help him design his projects. Anyways, I went to his house and he was working on gathering the information for his family tree. Lucky for him, his family was close-knit. They had a notebook that had every family member listed. The notebook was divided into 2 parts, people on Brian's mom's side and people on Brian's dad's side. Each family member had their own page and methods of contact. For some family members, there were notes about the individual. Brian let me scroll through the notebook, and there was one page that was really out of the ordinary. The page was dedicated to this girl named Martha. Martha's page was literally blank. Her name was at the top of the page, and that was it. I asked Brian about who Martha was. Brian stared at Martha's page for a long time. He looked at the page with a blank expression and looked frozen in thought. It took a good 5 minutes before he said, "I don't know. I really don't." He told me he would ask his parents when they have some spare time. Both his parents worked. He was home alone most of the time. I left Brian's house after helping him on his project, and this Martha girl scared the crap out of me. There was something off about this girl. She was the only person in the book with a blank page. She was on Brian's dad's side of the family and shared the same last name as Brian. Who is she, and why was her page blank? It took a month before Brian talked about Martha again. Brian told me his parents were just as confused as him. They contacted everyone that was listed in the notebook, and no one knew who Martha was. No one had one iota of info on Martha. Now, this was intriguing. I really wanted to know who Martha was. Brian told me that the page may have been set up as a prank. Deep down inside, I had a feeling it wasn't. Her page was there, so there has to be a reason behind the madness. Brian and I never talked about Martha again until the last day we met before going our separate ways for college. It was an ordinary day. We were going to go to the movies and the arcade to hang out. Brian brought up the Martha girl during lunch. I was surprised Brian brought it up, because at this point it had been 3.5 years since her name was mentioned. Brian told that a couple of weeks ago he received a package from a person named Martha, and the return address was from an apartment complex in New York. He also mentioned that a map of New York and a set of keys were included in the package. Someone in Brian's family knew who Martha was. It was the only logical way, in my mind, for this situation to play out. Brian told me he put in a leave of absence for his upcoming quarter in college, and he would go to New York to investigate things for himself. He said his parents were very supportive of his decision and that he would text me during his trip. Brian did text me for the first 3 days. His trip he booked was 2 weeks. During his first 3 days, he would text me pictures of New York and the landmarks. He decided to do some sightseeing, and it didn't surprise me. Brian and I had never really explored anywhere past where we live. Both of us never visited any of the other states or traveled out of the country. This trip was something new for Brian, and he really wanted to make the most of it. However, on the fourth day, he stopped texting me. The fifth day was the same as the fourth day. I started texting him back, hoping he would answer back. I got no response. For the rest of the 2 weeks, Brian didn't respond to my texts. 2 weeks later, I received a rather large package. It was from Martha, and I flipped out. So many thoughts were running in my head. Who is this girl? How did she get my address? Hours passed by. I didn't want to open it, but something pushed me to. I regretted that decision. Inside this package was a rather large styrofoam box. Inside the styrofoam box was Brian's head. No rest for the innocent. Unknown author. All my relatives remember my father being a blast to be around. He was charming, charismatic, and was literally always there when someone needed him. He started off as a small-town police officer and worked his way up to detective in a few years' time. He had won awards and recognition for his community service and length of time in the force. His only real issue was his obsession with one particular case he was assigned. The Nancy Maynard case was a huge deal in my area. The teenage girl had disappeared on her way back home from school, and there hadn't been a single lead on her case since. My father was assigned the case and led the investigation. He did everything he possibly could to find out what happened to her, but all his effort was in vain. Everyone said he combed the scene of the crime almost daily, interviewed friends and family members for any hint of information, and had the Computer Crimes Division look over her online activity, but nothing was found. After a few weeks on the case, the media had moved on, and the case went cold. The Maynard family and mine had become almost one family during this terrible time. They pleaded and begged my father to continue the search for their daughter. All their hopes and dreams were placed squarely on him. He promised to find her, even if it killed him. Even after his retirement, he worked on the case privately. He would close himself off in the basement for hours at a time, trying to conjure up a solid clue about the disappearance. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to keep his promise. He passed away before the case could be solved. Too much stress, too many fast food burgers, and not nearly enough exercise. His funeral was attended by many police officers, friends, and family, including the Maynards. They spoke of him as a living saint at the funeral. Without my father on the case, there was no one else to work it. The case was officially dead. After the funeral, my mother was too depressed to go through his belongings. She tasked me with the job of sorting out his belongings for donation, disposal, or storage. It wasn't much easier for me, to be honest, but at least I could spare my mother some of the pain she would feel. The basement was full of my father's old junk. Clothing, furniture, and generally everything that he had ever owned was stored in that basement. It took a few days to clear out the junk. Couches, bedroom sets, and other assorted large items had taken up most of the basement, and they had already been tossed away. The only pieces of trash remaining were the mattresses leaning against the far wall of the basement. Moving the mattresses revealed a large metal door hidden behind them. The metal door was heavy and required all my weight to push it open. Dust fell off from the hinges, and it screeched loudly in protest when it finally allowed me to pass. My effort was rewarded with a set of dark stairs leading even further downward into the ground. It seemed like what I imagined a bomb shelter would look like. I came upon another metal door and struggled with it until it came open. That's when I stepped into the room and screamed. I can only confirm that the remains belong to Nancy Maynard. There's no exact way to tell how she died, but I know the remainder of her life hadn't been pleasant. There were videotapes of what my father did to her. The sick fuck forced her to watch herself being tortured and abused. He taunted her with videotapes of her parents living their lives after her disappearance. He told her how much her parents missed her and how he got off on their misery. That's only a fraction of the horror she experienced. There were diary entries with details about what he did. Why the hell did he feel the need to write them down? It was probably the cop in him, documenting everything that happens for the record. Everything Mr. and Mrs. Maynard said to him about Nancy was written in his journal. He showed her the case file with her own name on it, the news articles about her, and the poster with her name and picture on them. By the end of the whole ordeal, her spirit must have been broken. By the end of everything, my own spirit was broken. He'd used the interrogation techniques on her he learned on the job. Worst part was that he was planning to do it again once he was done with Nancy. If my father was still alive, I would have taken this to the police right away. Hell, I might have killed him myself. As far as I'm concerned, the man who I thought was my father was really a monster, hidden in plain sight. Someone depraved and sick to the core of his being that did this to a young girl in the house he lived in with his wife and son. But this isn't the case anymore. He's dead. If there is a hell, I hope he burns in it for the rest of eternity. As far as for the living, I have decided to keep this a secret. In some instances, ignorance is bliss. My mother would die if she found out about this, and she doesn't deserve it. My entire family would suffer the consequences of the depravity of a dead man. Nancy suffered more than any of us, except for the Maynards. The police are going to get an anonymous tip about the location of Nancy Maynard. Her remains in a shallow grave in the woods. I hope that at least I can give them some peace of mind. I know that I won't have any for the rest of my life. I got a text from my best friend who was missing for 8 years. Author unknown. So something very strange happened to me recently, and I don't know how to explain it. It all started back in 2007. I was in kindergarten, and I was not exactly the most sociable kid. Yeah, I was one of those lonely kids that didn't play with anyone else. From what I remember, and from what my parents have told me, I basically had no friends until I met Jordan. I don't remember how we met, but Jordan and I instantly became best friends. We visited each other's houses, had birthday parties, you name it. Fast forward 3 years later, I was sleeping over at Jordan's house, and Jordan suggested that we sneak out of the house and go into the woods in his neighborhood. In case you couldn't already tell, Jordan was the type of kid that would always do a bunch of stupid stuff. He would always convince me to do dangerous things with him, and then we'd both get in trouble for it. After all, we were only 9 at the time. I didn't want to go at first, but Jordan kept harassing me about it until I finally gave in and agreed to go with him. We crept downstairs and out the door, being careful not to make too much noise. We then ran down the street and into the woods. We sort of just hung out there for a while until Jordan and I both agreed we should go back to the house. However, we soon realized that we were lost. We both panicked and wondered how we were going to get back to civilization. Eventually, an old man came up to us and told us that he knew the way back. He looked to be at least 90 years old and had a long gray beard. Since we were young and panicked, we trusted him. The 3 of us walked for a long time, and I was beginning to have second thoughts about trusting this person. I whispered to Jordan that maybe we should just find our own way back. The man must have heard me because he grabbed both of us by the backs of our shirts and tried to drag us off. I was able to escape, but tragically, I can't say the same about my childhood friend. The next morning, I told Jordan's mom what happened, and the police were contacted. They searched the woods, but couldn't find the old man that matched my description. Eventually, Jordan's family lost hope and decided that he was probably dead. At first, I felt guilty because I was in the woods with Jordan at the time, but I eventually moved on and made new friends, since I was no longer as socially inept as I used to be. 8 years came and went, and I never heard about Jordan, although he was still in the back of my mind. That all changed last night. I was messing around on my phone late at night, which I usually do when I can't sleep. It was about 4 a.m., and I had to get up for school in 2 hours. Suddenly, my text tone went off. I wondered who could possibly be texting me at this ungodly hour. I checked the text, and it was from a random number with the same area code as me. I opened it and saw the words, "Hi, Matthew," on the screen. I had no idea who this person was or how they knew my name, so naturally I replied back, "Who is this?" I got a reply almost immediately. "Don't be silly, dude. It's me, Jordan." I dropped my phone on my bed, and a million thoughts went through my brain as I read it. At first, I thought that maybe one of my friends had a twisted sense of humor and was playing a prank on me. I decided to text my friend Catherine and see what she thought of it. Me: "Are you up?" Catherine: "I am now." "What the hell do you want? Do you know what time it is?" Me: "Some random number just texted me and said he was Jordan. He also somehow knew my name." Catherine: "I know that didn't actually happen. Now stop making crap up and go to sleep." I sent her screenshots of the conversation I had with a random number. Catherine told me to ask him things about myself, and he'd leave me alone. I asked him what class I had 4th hour, and I was horrified when I got a text that read, "English." I have no idea what to think. The only thing I can do is go to school tomorrow and see what happens. I got Catherine and Jordan to meet me at the front of the building in the morning. I'll update you guys on what happens. A Walk in the Woods. Anonymous author. The woods seemed to be alive. The dark seemed to breathe. Every noise enhanced tenfold. Clara was terrified, exhausted, and cursing herself for getting off the trail. She had been walking for hours, the campsite nowhere to be found. I must have gotten turned around. She shivered, wrapping her arms around herself for some measure of comfort. Tears flowed freely. This whole day started off well. She decided to walk in a part of the woods she had never been in. It was far too late when she realized she was lost. Branches and twigs kept snapping in every direction. She knew she wasn't alone. It's just an animal. Breathe. It will be okay, Clara said out loud, trying to squash the feeling of impending doom that was rising like hot bile in her throat. Goose flesh rose on her pale skin. She picked up her pace. She was never good with directions, but she was sure she was moving north. At least she hoped. But hope drained as the hours went by. She came to a familiar-looking rock and came to the realization she had been walking in a circle for hours. She decided to move in the opposite direction. It was completely dark at this point, and Clara could barely see in front of her. She seemed to stumble over every rock and stick. A laugh that was so inhuman it was sickening, and a screech that made the blood run icy cold. Clara started running in full force. Then out of nowhere, she lost her footing, tripping and smacking her head on a rock. She was out instantly. When she came to, she knew she wasn't alone. She heard ragged breathing and smelled the stench of death. It was thick. She could almost taste it. She saw a black figure crawling on all fours. Long, straggly hair obscured its face. It was coming up fast on her. Clara screamed, managed to get to her feet. She was disoriented. She was able to run, so she kept going, her legs screaming and lungs burning. Survival, her only thought. Then she saw it, the outline of the edge of the woods. She could make out campfires lit in the distance. She was so close. She knew she could escape the grasp of this inhuman entity. She could feel it so very close. But Clara was fast. She had run track in college. Just 100 meters, her brain screamed. Finally, reaching the end of the trail, then she felt it. The being wrapped its claws around her ankle. Clara dropped face first to the forest floor, blood and streaming tears on her face. Clara screamed for a final time. Then she belonged to the creature. I would like to give a heartfelt thank you to the special friends of the channel for your overwhelming generosity. If you would like to support the channel, the link is below in the description. Also, please send me your stories and poems to duchessofdarkness27@gmail.com. You can also find me on Instagram at duchess.ofdarkness and Twitter at duchessofdarkn2. I want to thank all my listeners for your kindness, your encouragement, and your support. It means the world to me. Thank you for joining me. Until next time.